The issue that we're starting to see is how many thousands of kids get burnt out. That they're involved in such a rigorous training schedule at the age of 9 that mentally, physically, psychologically, however you want to define it, they're not necessarily ready for that level of coaching.
Okay, welcome listeners to our podcast titled Play On, Why Street Soccer. This is episode number 4. My name is John Henderson. I'm here with my co-host, CEO, founder of Metal Sports, Neal Levin, the nation's leading advocate for street soccer. We have a really special guest today. He was a 2-time D1 All-American goalkeeper, held executive positions with USTA, that's tennis, USA Triathlon, USA Swimming, Arena Football League. He's currently the CEO of U.S. Youth Soccer, the largest affiliate of the U.S. Soccer Federation. We're here with Skip Gilbert. Thanks, Skip, for joining us.
My pleasure, John. Thanks for having me.
So, Skip, we're uber excited about this, man. John and I have been talking about this for a few days, and you and I have exchanged a number of dialogues on this, and I've read your fabulous article that you wrote for Sports Biz Journal back in April. And, someone at your level, Skip, who's recognizing and starting a conversation publicly about questions relative to the pay-to-play system, that's a big deal. This is a conversation I don't think is regularly had in the past. I think it absolutely needs to be had. And so we are just thrilled that you're here to talk to us about it. So let's dive right in. What is the pay-to-play model?
Sure. Well, thank you, Neal. From all aspects, if you think about high school soccer, that's you just go out, you play. Pay to play is where the family or the player is actually compensating the club, the coaches, that infrastructure for the ability to get out onto the field to play the game.
And how long has that been going on generally? I mean, I know a lot of this is going to come back to soccer, but we'll talk in some generalities first, because it does exist in lots of different sports and activities.
Oh, sure. It's not a soccer specific issue. Pay to play is just about any sport under the umbrella. Your parents are going to write checks. I have a daughter that rows, and you think soccer is expensive? That's an expensive sport. But at the end of the day, pay to play has been around for a long time. It's just that with the onset of the youth sport economic engine, the ability for clubs to basically justify keeping the lights on, hire professional coaches, have great manicured fields, someone has to pay for that. And it ultimately comes down to the parents.
Well, okay. So manicured fields, coaches, we're seeing 3 and 4-year-olds being coached to be professional athletes right now. So that begs the question, is that really where we're supposed to be going with it?
Personally, no. I don't, and professionally, I don't think so. Granted, and I have this discussion all the time with people that say, whether it's a 3-year-old or even a 9-year-old, should they be exposed to professional level coaching? And sure, there's going to be those one-offs where someone's going to come out of that type of a program and be on a World Cup team or play MLS or go over and play in Europe. The issue that we're starting to see is how many thousands of kids get burnt out. That they're involved in such a rigorous training schedule at the age of 9 that mentally, physically, psychologically, however you want to define it, they're not necessarily ready for that level of coaching. And we convince the clubs, we convince the parents that sure they are, and they need to if they want to get that Division I scholarship. And yes, that the successes are there. My concern is the churn rate. How many kids are leaving soccer, football, baseball, basketball because we're throwing too many expectations on them?
So John O'Sullivan from Changing the Game Project, future guest here on Play On, has a statistic that came out in 2015 that 70% of youth are leaving sports, organized sports, by the age 13. And the number one reason given, and there's several reasons, but the number one reason that commonly comes up is that it's no fun anymore. And when you pare down why it's no fun, a lot of it does come back to parents, parental pressure, pacing the sidelines, always talking about how you need to do better, you need to push harder. But then a lot of that is also the coaching, that it hasn't been fun to work with a coach who, to your point, is submitting to the economic engine, which in part is, unless you win, you don't get paid.
Well, and it's a never-ending cycle, because as a parent, when you're spending thousands of dollars a year on your kids to play, you almost feel like you're empowered to be a general manager. You need to be able to dictate everything that goes on. So you yell at the coach, you yell at the referee, you yell at anybody that moves, and you yell at your kid in the backseat of the car on your way home. So it's a self-perpetuating downfall that, and again, it's not just a soccer issue. It goes across all sports. We've almost placed families into that lane. And it's just a continual evolution. So the idea is, it's not so much we'll never end the pay-to-play model. The question is, how do we come up with alternative programming so that the pressure is taken off of families, that they don't need to spend $10,000 a year to get their kid through U9, but they can spend a couple of hundred or whatever the dollar amount is, but it's much less taxing on parents, and it's a fair model to be able to get what you would get.
Well, okay, so that underscores a concept we brought up here before, and that is that we've taken youth sports away from the kids, and it becomes about the parent. And if the parent's going to pay, the parent's going to want a return on that from the kid. But aren't we going a little bit deeper in that? Aren't we going into the psyche of the parent itself? Like, if my kid doesn't perform at high levels, especially if I paid a lot of money to put him there or her there, it says something personal about me. Are we ever going to change that?
And it's interesting, because the parallel to that is education. And I say there's a pay to education model that we often try to, and that was sort of the genesis of the article that I wrote, which is, most kids go to public high school, and that's funded through your tax dollars. Some parents, because again, they want their kids to get ahead, they have the revenue to be able, and the discretionary income, they send their kids to private school. That's never going to change. There are always going to be parents that will be more than happy to write checks to the Ivy League and want their kids at that level of education. But it's not to say there's nothing wrong with the educational format of public schools. I mean, my kids two of them went to Ivy League, one went to public, I went to public, and you make what you make out of it. The problem in sports is that outside of high school, there really isn't an alternative public sport education, if you will, to be able to offer parents that alternative. Mm-hmm. And so it's either, and what we're seeing, and kids are leaving, is that the only road most parents think is that you have to join the club team, mm-hmm. and you have to get into that cycle. But you can't fault them, because what else are they going to do? And some parents don't believe that if you only play high school, that's going to be a great way to get into college from a sport perspective.
Well, those are the disbeliefs, right? We have a series of disbeliefs, and to your point, good-hearted, fantastic parents are unfortunately buying into this, the rising tide theory, right? So they're buying into these two misbeliefs. One, if you send your kid to private school, they're going to have a better education and do better professionally, which we know is not the case. It's, as you point out, it's what you make of it, right? And so some people do better at a private school because they make something different of it, or they take the opportunity differently. But that's not to say that we don't have thousands and thousands of people benefiting from going to public schools. And look at the levels you achieved going through the public school. Well, isn't that true then of development? Isn't our development model that we've somehow brainwashed parents, even good-hearted, good parents, into the idea that unless I get my kid into a stellar program by the time they're 5, they're never going to make it?
And yeah, I mean, from a 5-year-old, sure. But again, there are thousands of clubs around the country that, certainly charge the parents to play. And that's a great resource center for them. I mean, again, we're not trying to come out and say we should get rid of the club system, because that's just not going to happen. The issue is for all of the clubs that are there are plenty of kids that may not fit that model that the club is trying to achieve. They love the game, they want to play, but they don't really think or they may not have the skill set to be able to get to a D1 college. And so there has to be that alternative measure. So there has to be a happy medium. We want the clubs to succeed, but at the same token, we don't want the clubs to be the only game in town, because by design, not every kid can go to an Ivy League school. It's just not going to happen. And we have to have that alternative programming for kids to be able to show their passion, their love for the game, but to do so under their design, under their means, and not tax the parents.
So I was having fabulous dinner last night at Argentinian Steakhouse with two very dear friends. One of them just got a doctorate at a school in Italy, in Italian. He taught himself Italian when he was in his 50s, and then enrolled in this school in the doctoral program and wrote this amazing thesis, presented it in Italian, and now he's a doctor. And he was noting the extreme differences between the secondary education, for instance, in Europe versus the secondary education here. Number one thing that he noticed is that when we go to our secondary education source here in the United States, we're kind of fixated there. Yes, we have study abroad programs. Maybe you're going to get a few months overseas, which a lot of people partake in. But there, every weekend, they're traveling. They're going to different cities. The schools intentionally don't have school on Fridays so that you can get out of town and experience more things. They're reaching out into the world in ways that I think we're still catching up on. I find that anecdotally similar to especially soccer. And that goes back to our theory that we didn't invent it. We're trying to catch up still, which is one of the reasons that we're not as good as we could be internationally. So do you see any parallels there? I mean, I'm very concerned that we are not in our system, and especially in the pay-to-play system, recognizing that the vast majority of the world, especially the best ballers in the world in soccer, didn't do it the way we're having them do it here.
It certainly is an issue. And you also have to compound the dilemma of, at least let's look at soccer, the fact that it's an incredibly fractionalized universe in the United States. And back when I was playing, you only had one path. You came through, your school, your club, ODP, and if you had that on your resume, chances are you're going to get picked up and, your career was going to be accelerated. In today's world, you have every acronym under the sun kind of fighting for their mind share, but also U.S. Soccer has not just one pathway, they have multiple pathways. You have your organizational members, and now each of the leagues are creating their academies. So you have so many different avenues that no one really knows truly which is the best avenue to take. Because again, you could have, one of our clubs, a great club, playing in the National League right next to an ECNL club, and they never play each other. So you really can't test the fact that, who's actually going to win that game, where they end up having to get in an airplane and go fly somewhere else to be able to get a competitive match. And so, we've kind of done it to ourselves in that case that, can we do things to bridge that gap so that perhaps now we can get a little bit more control of the fractionalization of what we're seeing in this country?
Well, two things come up. One, a statistic I just saw the other day that something like 11% of the kids that go into the MLS academies actually end up playing for those teams. So the academies are not necessarily being built to develop players for their teams. They're being built because they pay a lot of money to be in those academies. And that's the commercial engine that you're talking about. If only 11% are there, what are they doing it for? If they're only able to bring up 11%, what are they doing it for? We're still using a huge number. I know there's limits, but we're maximizing the limits on our ability to use foreign-borns in MLS teams. We're not providing those opportunities for our own. Now, someone's going to argue, well, they're not as capable. Well, that's the point, that we are signing on to a developmental model that I don't think mirrors the rest of the world that has done a different job of this. And so on that point, you, I believe, have an umbrella over roughly 3.5 million players, which is 90 some odd percent of all the players in the U.S. Soccer Federation. That would include national teams all the way down to the rec leagues and AYSO and the like. You're at about 3.5, is that right?
Actually, a little high. We're at 2.5.
Oh, 2.5. Okay. So
Yeah.
2.5 out of the three. Oh, 3.5 might be where the Federation is coming in at with their numbers, depending on the double counting, et cetera. So you still got a vast majority of the players. I'm seeing estimates out there that there's roughly 20 million people in the United States who play the game. So with you and the Federation serving a fraction of the whole, it begs the question, where is that gap? And so the question that comes from that is, how many players reach the highest levels within U.S. youth soccer and U.S. Federation that come from the urban centers, that come from at-risk, low-income neighborhoods?
Yeah, and the data, we don't have that data. I would imagine it's fairly small, because again, we have our success in school programs, which is to try to bring soccer into those urban areas, to the Title I schools, to be able to educate the school administrators and the coaches. How can you increase not just soccer participation, but sport participation? Because it's not so much we want all kids playing soccer. We really want all kids playing sport. I mean, I'm a big believer in multi-sport up until, it gets to the point where you want to be on a certain pathway. And unfortunately, in the inner city, because the budgets are so minuscule that they just don't have the dollars for a robust sport program. And so, we and other NGBs are trying to do the same thing to bring that in. So, yes, the number of kids coming out of those kinds of programs that are finding themselves on, a path to a World Cup team, very small.
Well, you and I have just started this discussion and taken it a step further. And, it's our belief at Metal that we don't need to build robust sports programs in the inner city. In fact, we got an interesting statistic. I'll call it a statistic, though we don't have the actual data to support it. But generally speaking, from the parks people at Chicago Park District alone, the vast majority of kids who could participate in even very low cost, we're talking $20 or $30 or no cost programs, don't. And the reason that it appears to be that way is because they don't want to register. They don't want to go Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays at this specific time. They don't want to be coached. There's other reasons. There's shame, not feeling worthy. There's a lot of psyche behind a lot of what goes on deep in the urban centers. But a big part of the problem appears to be that we try and create and transpose from what's currently happening predominantly in elite white suburban programs, this type of robust sports. And it's our belief as a general principle, people are being they're kind of done being told what to do. And they want empowerment from creating their own rules, playing at their own pace, playing with their own friends. I'm sure, just like Joanna Lohman, who was our last guest, and she remarkably didn't even start playing organized soccer until she was a junior in high school, and then makes it to the women's national team and professional ball. And she feels she is not an anomaly. She feels the vast majority of those of people like her who multi-sport, who play constantly with their friends and their families out in the front yard every day after school, those are her teammates. And as you even pointed out, yes, some go through this system of being coached when they're 3 or 5 or 8 to be professional athletes and do make it, but the vast majority don't. So how do we do this? How do we find the balance between the extremes of what we're doing over at Metal and just dropping street soccer courts and letting them play, which they do, they come out in droves to play, with each other, with community members, without care for structure or timing or pennies or cones, and what you want to do, and that is you want to help kids learn how to play soccer and then achieve higher successes, especially from the urban center. How do we create that balance?
Yeah, and that, again, it goes back. I started January of 2020, and we immediately changed our vision, which now reads, to bring communities together through the power of soccer, making lifelong fans of the game. And that really is what drives a lot of what I think about during the day. We're not here to put kids on an MLS field or, a World Cup competition. If it happens, great. But for the most part, 95% of the kids that come through a sport are going to go to college, graduate, and then become fans of the game if they stay connected to it. And so part of my charge, and this is where it trickles down into almost the inner city elements, is look at recreational soccer at the 12 and above group. It's exactly what you just said. Kids can't play with their friends. They don't want to be structured in the typical practice once or twice a week, 11v11 on Saturdays or Sundays. They realize that they're probably not good enough to make their college team, but they still love the sport, so they want to be able to play. And we have to be able to create an out. I mean, I coached for years in Colorado, and when our kids, and we just wanted the kids, the entire team wanted to stay together just for the fun of it. And as soon as they turned to U13, the league basically said, we've got, you can play against the U18s in the adult league, but we don't really have anything for recreational because it's not, it's just not there. There's not enough people. And so realistically, if you could take fields, drop them down short-sided, I'm sure a lot of the kids that I had that were 13, 14, 15 that didn't want to go to travel ball, they would have loved to have just gone out and played short-side, play with their friends, play pickup, and that's, we have to somehow get into that model. So the discussion really, again, working with the clubs, yes, but also with the rec departments in each town to say, can we find fields that, are just free for all? Let kids come and go. And in today's world, we have to have some structure because of the trust factor. Parents may not want their kids just going down to some field that's, no one's standing at. Right. There's that fear factor. And so, how do we manage expectations? How do we provide alternative programming? And if we can do that, you might find a lot of kids that 12, 13, 14, 15 playing this free type of soccer that when they actually get to high school, all of a sudden something's come on, they've picked something, and now all of a sudden their career is going to explode. But, if we don't have that, how many kids aren't going to have that opportunity? And I go back, the other point is being able to also give those kids the opportunity to play other sports. 90+% of the kids that were drafted in the NFL first round played multiple sports in high school.
Bam.
And when you look at, and I worked at U.S. Tennis, I sat at midcourt before I managed the U.S. Open, and I'm standing out with our chief medical officer watching one of our top Americans warm up. And I said, why is it that guys on the American side aren't top 5? And they have the skill set. But the differentiating factor is that when you look at Roger Federer, Novak Djokovic, Rafa Nadal, Andy Murray, what do they all have in common? They played tennis, but they mostly played soccer. They ran track. They played other sports until tennis took over from them. And that's the difference, is that their muscular skeletal, their body design was adaptable through other sports so that they could use that muscle memory to be able to go from point A to point B quicker than anybody else. Playing multiple sports will help you do that and achieve that. And that's one of the things we're missing.
Well, I think it goes beyond the physical, right? This also is about the psychological. Playing multi-sport allows you to breathe between sports, allows you to have fun. You're having more fun, right? You're not so fixated on doing it 6 days a week that all of a sudden you get the burnout you were talking about earlier, right? So I believe there's so much of the cycle and emotional piece to what you're talking about, but I'm going to go even bigger. So our theory here is that we have to develop the person before we develop the athlete. And if we start them too young and we're only focusing on developing the athlete, skills, touches, we forget the person. And, there's so many anecdotal stories we could bring up. How many games did Messay's parents watch him play before he was coached when he got into his teens? Probably next to zero, right? How many, and unfortunately our listeners can't see over my shoulder right now, but I've got a 3v3 pitch, exactly what you're talking about, in a neighborhood of Chicago. And those boys on the one side are about 13, 14 years old, and the boys on the other side are in their mid-20s. And they came together and they played a game where they've never known each other or played each other before. And they played 4v4 for an hour. And I'm telling you, that kid that's got the ball, number 9, he was outstanding. But our old model was to say, oh, he's great, so let's try and pluck him out of there and send him up to some elite white suburban league. And that always fails because they just don't feel worthy where they belong. But more importantly, they're out there learning life skills that I feel that were taken away from the kids. We need to give sports and activities. You and I have talked about theater. We've talked about chess. We've talked about rowing. All sports and activities, we need to give it back to the kids and allow the kids to be kids and develop as kids without the economic engine, as you pointed out, and without our own personal egos getting in the way and putting upon our kids what it is that we want for them, as opposed to letting them find the pure enjoyment. I think that's what happens in the urban centers under our watch, and we're not embracing it. And I think we go one step further and say we're not recognizing that that's the way it's done internationally.
Yeah, and again, it's and I sat through my first week at USYS through one of the European countries came in and talked about player development and how we should embrace their design because it works. Well, I mean, the reality is their country is the size of Delaware, and it doesn't necessarily work in the United States. So, the reality is we have, and across all sports, not just soccer, we have the pay to play model, which will work for a good majority of the players. They still love the game. They embrace it. They like the structure. They understand what they're getting out of it, what they're putting in. That model works. What we need to come up with is an alternative model, what you've been suggesting, that can work for the kids that don't necessarily want to be in there and the thousands and potentially millions of kids that really aren't under, US Soccer, USYS, or US Club, or any of the other acronyms. They're not under those lanes, but they're still really good players. And so, we want to be able to have, multifaceted programming so that every kid has the opportunity to learn about the sport, to have passion for it, and ultimately, part of our vision, become fans for life. Because if you're 13 years old, you don't think you're good enough, you're just a rec player, you don't have the skill set, and you walk away disenfranchised, by the time they get to be my age, are they going to be watching it on the TV? Are they going to be coaching, refereeing? Are they going to be pushing their kids or grandkids into a sport? Probably not. So we want those kids to stay connected right through their high school years. And that's where, I think our focus has to be. We're not going to change the club model. That's here to stay. We need to develop other programming to get the millions of kids that don't have the ability or the want to go club to go here.
Well, not only do I love the hybrid model that you're talking about, I love the fact that you, in your position, are talking about it. That is huge. And I don't know if people will get that right away, but that is a big deal. And I'm going to quote something you said in your article, quote, "It creates a fun entry point for all children and for those that play for social benefits and don't want to follow an elite path. It allows them to stay in the sport throughout their teenage years." And as we've seen, if you allow that, maybe in the teenage years, they do decide to go elite and will successfully do so, but you're giving them the option without overcommitting them on a path. And just like private schools, to your point, it works for some parents with the egos, and it doesn't work for some parents with the egos. And again, back to Joanna's example, her parents were all about, do what you want. Oh, you don't want to go and play a tournament over Christmas holiday? You'd rather be with us? Fine. Of course. We support that. Here, go catch a football and learn the arc of a ball and have some fun. She played football growing up. So I think it's brilliant what you're saying. I applaud you for it. And we're going to be right there cheering it on and finding every way that we can be a part of that. So, I think in some, we're allowing for not only the economic engine to continue for some or many, we're allowing for parents to be parents, because we're not going to go out there and tell parents you need to change the way you're going to be a parent. We know that's taboo, and that never comes out successfully. And we're honoring and serving the kids over my shoulder and the thousands who have come out and played street soccer just because, as well as, and I wish I could share with the listeners one of my favorite pictures. We're in a neighborhood of Chicago, a neighborhood predominantly doesn't play soccer, that actually wish they played soccer, but everyone assumed that, well, if you're a black person in the city of Chicago, you don't play soccer. And we dropped the street soccer pitch down, and we've got a couple of moms out there every day playing with their kids. Quite frankly, and we're going to make this very specific, and I know we've extended this to other sports and activities, but soccer is the only thing in the world that I know that has that power.
You know what? It's a lifestyle. It's not just a sport, but for soccer, I mean, again, you go around the world, the passion people have when they watch the game, when they play the game, it really is that side of it. And from my perspective, I'm still connected with, a lot of the other Olympic sports, and we have meetings. And I was just in a meeting last week, and a number of the CEOs, they come up to me and, half kidding, they say, you know what, we love soccer because you get every kid at the age of 6. And by the time they're 10, they're either burnt out, they're not having fun, they're this, that, or the other, and they come to our sport. So you're sort of we call you the transition sport. Now, not that I'm competitive, but we can't have that. That's got to end. And so again, we have the club side, which has been tremendous, and we support it, but we have to develop that alternative programming so that we can get millions of more kids to become fans for life. And if we can do that, everybody wins. Because again, it's that old adage, a rising tide benefits all boats. More kids that play, more kids are going to be free plays, more kids are going to go in the club program, more kids are going to play high school, college at a much higher level. And then ultimately everybody wins.
And we're going to go a step further. The social gains from the power of this culture versus the sport itself, you can't deny it. There's a reason this is the world sport. There's a reason so many cultures play it. When soccer first came to the United States, I remember playing as you did in high school, and we had Manny from South America, and Manny's saying, "You don't understand soccer here. In our country, it's a culture. It's not a sport." And I think that, again, back to the idea of developing the person, honoring the person, acknowledging the person, giving ownership of their development to the person before you actually train them into being an elite athlete is essential. And so I do think that a huge, huge piece of this is how we're going to help communities themselves as part of that rising tide. So all these outcomes that you're talking about, more people watching, more people playing, and necessarily more people loving the sport is also going to produce more great players.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And here's something, which is why this is such a huge priority for me. And I go back to, Nelson Mandela's quote, sport has the way to change the world. It can inspire people and bring everybody together. And it's the language that kids understand. I was talking to Jeremy Goldberg from League Apps 2 weeks ago. He was a keynote speaker at our leadership summit. And we were talking about the opportunities, especially for a sport like soccer that is a lifestyle, passion-based exercise. In that in 2024, everybody is thinking it could be one of the most divisive elections in U.S. history. And if we have communities that are so divisive, could soccer be one of the catalysts to bring the country back together? And if you think about what that could then walk into with the World Cup coming, the Olympic Games coming, the Women's World Cup potentially coming, we can really use soccer as a way to bring communities back together so that by the time we roll into those events coming to the United States, we could hopefully have a formula and a roadmap for every kid to play, no matter where they're from, no matter, what their designs are, no matter what challenges they face. They know that their safe haven is right out there in the soccer field, whatever that field might look like.
Skip, I literally have chills. You're talking about putting the game that belongs to the people back in the hands of the people. And I'm, outstanding. I applaud you I applaud you. I applaud you. Outstanding motivation, especially from your organization. So I guess, I'd love to end it on that note, but I have to ask you, what are your parting words for JT Batson, who was just announced as the new CEO of U.S. Soccer Federation?
It's going to be a tough job. He's walking into, a very fractionalized entity. You've got the governance side of the house that he has to be able to navigate. And then you have the practical side as well as the player national team side of it. It's not an easy job, but I just say go in wide open with your eyes wide open, talk to as many people as you can, get a lay of the land, and ultimately do what's in the best interest, hopefully following our vision of making fans for life. And if U.S. Soccer continues to do what they're doing in that regard, hopefully we'll all be smiling in a few years down the road of, what are some of the great things that we're all doing together.
Well, I hope he hears this, takes your advice. Reminds me of one of my favorite episodes from Ted Lasso. Be curious and listen. It's the dartboard scene, in case anyone wants to look it up. But
greatest scene, that dartboard scene is without question one of the best written episodes, period.
Phenomenal. Barbecue sauce. Well, Skip, can't thank you enough. And I know that we're going to continue this dialogue offline, but I want you to come back again and we're going to see how things are going. Really appreciate your contributions here, but especially what you're doing at the helm of U.S. Youth Soccer Organization, such a compelling organization with 2.5 million players to effectively watch out for. I know that your aim is higher. Your aim is at the millions more who we haven't been giving attention to. And so we want to be with you every step of the way there, however we can. So again, thank you, and really appreciate you being part of Play On Why Street Soccer.
Neal, John, thanks very much for the invitation. Always a pleasure to talk about the game, and wish you guys the best of luck moving forward as well.
All right, that's a wrap. What an amazing conversation with Skip Gilbert, CEO of U.S. Youth Soccer. I got to tell you, the conversation is being had and at very high levels of the soccer world and in youth sports. Changes are coming. Let's keep talking about it. Let's keep addressing these issues because we have to fix youth sports for sure. Great episode, and stay tuned for the next one. Linda Flanagan, author of Take Back the Game, How Money and Mania Are Ruining Kids' Sports and Why It Matters. Thanks for joining us. Keep the likes coming. Keep the shares coming. Send this out to everyone you know. We want to hear from you. Write to us at info@metalsports.com, info@metalsports.com. Until next time, play on.